Alright guys, Tactical Bit here, and today we're going to talk about gentlemen's agreements. From my perspective, this seems like the most divisive issue right now in the entirety of Call of Duty. Whenever I see a Reddit thread, whenever I see a Twitter discussion, it always seems like it's super controversial, and there's many people on either side of the argument. So today I don't necessarily want to just give my opinion, but I want to weigh in on exactly what it is, how we've seen in the past, why they can be a useful thing, but also why the pros do take them too far at times. So I want to give both sides of the argument, but mostly this is going to be a discussion thing, because I know you guys will have a lot of interesting opinions down in the comment section below. And I also wanted to share this post which I saw on Reddit yesterday, which I'll go through as time goes on because it's very interesting indeed. And I doubt you'll have considered the angle that this gentleman or lady proposes. So like if you enjoy, subscribe if you're new as always. So you may hear the term GA, and that stands for Gentleman's Agreement, which is a bit of a funny term, but effectively it means a consensus between the pros not to use a certain item or a certain weapon or a certain piece of equipment in the game for the benefit of, well, the reasons tend to be either competitive integrity or entertainment, full stop. So I want to start with the positive aspects of this. This has come back into light recently with the grapple hook on Ruin. Now I feel like they're more severe things than the grapple hook, but I do agree to some extent that the grapple hook, the fact that you get it every single round in Search and Destroy, means that it's basically impossible to predict the timings. The first video I made on this channel in this style, way back in August, which is like a breakdown of the Black Ops 4 beta, I said that they need to make the grapple hook so you can't use it for the first 15 seconds of the round. So I like it. Like, you can make cool plays with it. I feel like the combination with the grapple hook into the gravity slam is a little bit strong, but you know, it's not my biggest complaint. But I do think the fact that it can break timings and create random timings, as I say, at the start of every round is a bit of a big deal, and I wish that were cut back to some extent. I also think you get it a little bit too often, considering you get it like every single round and sometimes almost every life in a respawn game mode, but we'll go into that in a little bit of time. Firstly, let's talk about the positive aspects of this. So some people are completely against Gentleman's Agreement in all of its forms, and I would invite them to go and play Infinite Warfare at the start of that game when the OSA meta was a thing. When the OSA, it was like a really high firing, really high recoil, like an ARX looking weapon from Advanced Warfare, but it was fully automatic. And the start of that game, it was just 4 OSAs on the map every time. People knew how to control the recoil ridiculously well. That was not a fun game to play, and it was not a fun game to watch. And if there was no Gentleman's Agreement, I don't know if it was ever banned, maybe it was nerfed, but at least if that hadn't been Gentleman's Agreement, we saw at the first event in Vegas it was used very widely indeed, and it was not a fun experience to be a part of. So I believe that was Gentleman's Agreement out, maybe it got nerfed as well, but we didn't see it in competitive for the rest of the year. The K-Bar and the NV4 and the ERAD came into the meta, and the problem is, really, the fundamental problem why Gentlemen's Agreements are in the game is because the developers aren't so quick to react, and understandably so, to what the pros see as a concern. Because if the pros raise something as a concern, the devs are going to have to, unless they're really respondent to the professional community, they're going to have to take a step back and look into that concern and decide whether from a public match standpoint it makes sense to nerf something. What I do think nowadays with these latest changes that I've talked about in recent videos, where they're changing things specifically from the competitive rule set, it actually could make sense to nerf a weapon, like for example in World War II, the M1 Garand. We went through a point where the M1 Garand was discovered to be a ridiculously strong 2-shot kill assault rifle, and in public matches, it's not a big deal because people don't know how to aim as well as the pros do. However, you put an M1 Garand with 12 bullets with extended mags in a professional's hand, and he's popping 3 pieces with 2 bullets apiece, left, right, and center. Like, absolutely ridiculous. Some of the pictures, some of the clips even I saw on Twitter. Something like that in the hands of a professional is very, very strong, and we would have seen a stupid amount of M1 Garands, and it probably wouldn't have made the game very fun to play. Similar thing happened when the ITRA came into play. People were scrimming S&D with the ITRA allowed, which is like the M8 weapon, the 4-round burst in World War II that was added like halfway through the game. People were playing S&D on it, and it was just 4 ITRAs either side because it was just the strongest weapon in Search and Destroy, the fact that it could 1-burst and all that. It made sense to Gentleman's Agreement, those weapons, because down the line, I believe the ITRA the ITRA wasn't banned, but the M1 Garand was banned a couple of months down the line, but it took a couple of months for the developers to react to the fact that, okay, yeah, this gun really is too strong for competitive play, it's gotta go. And those couple of months of time lag reduce the competitive integrity and also reduce the entertainment from the fact that you just have so many of the same weapon on each side and you feel like it's kind of a cheap gun in the hands of a professional player. So those are the issues, why gentlemen's agreements can solve some of these problems. And I do think they do have their place in Call of Duty to some extent, but there are definitely some downsides. I don't want you to take that as my entire opinion because there's definitely an incentive for people with gentlemen's agreements to promote the things that their team are very much struggling with. So for example, we've seen recently how Slasher and maybe Accuracy to some extent, I think it's just Slasher really, has been calling for the SORG, the SMG, to be gentleman's agreement out of competitive play. Now, okay, regardless of whether he actually thinks it's too strong or not, his team is very AR heavy, and he's one of the best assault rifles in Call of Duty. It makes sense from a personal standpoint for him to want that weapon out of the game. And therefore, you have to take things with a grain of salt. I think that unless gentlemen's agreements are agreed on unanimously throughout the professional teams, there shouldn't be the instances of it happening. Because recently we've seen with this gravity or with the grapple hook situation in Black Ops 4. I'll just show you this clip from Karma from yesterday. He gravity slams, gets 1,000 score by destroying a drone squad as well as getting 2 kills. This one as well from a little bit longer ago when he got this 3-piece and... You know, people are asking for this sort of stuff to be gone. I think this is pretty ridiculous, to be honest, because it just takes one guy to peek the little room, get the information, and there's nothing the enemy team can really do. And people say, okay, you know, you just don't stack up, right? But the problem is, it's super tough to know when they have this specialist available, and the fact that they have the gravity or the grapple hook, I keep saying it wrong, the grapple hook basically every single round means you always have to be on guard for this, and if you don't stack up in Black Ops 4 and they decide to push you, then you've got real issues on your hands. So it's very hard to counter something like this, and I understand to some extent why people want it gone. I don't particularly like specialists in competitive play, but regardless, I don't think it's the biggest deal we have in the game right now. The gentleman's agreement on something like this is definitely questionable. And Optic and FaZe as well, like Zuma especially, have said that, you know, they're not going to agree to these gentleman's agreement rules. And some people have been saying that supposedly Optic are going to get blacklisted from scrims as a result of not agreeing to the gentleman's agreement, which personally I think is a ridiculous premise. The fact that you're not agreeing to our proposed rule set, which is different to the official rule set, therefore we're not going to give you any good practice at all. This is very questionable indeed. I don't like the idea that you can get blacklisted from scrims just to not agreeing to this unofficial rule set, which, you know, as I say, the grapple hook isn't really the biggest issue in the game right now. I do think gentlemen's agreements have their place at times due to the slow responsiveness of the developers to the competitive concerns, because, like it or not, the pros do know what they're talking about, at least to some degree. And if the consensus of the pros is that, say, the ITRA or the OSA is just too strong, makes the game boring to play and boring to watch, because you've got to remember that a lot of these pros do have the interests of the community in mind. They do have the interests of entertainment. Of course, they want the game to be competitive. They want it to be the best team wins the majority of the time at least. But the problem is that they do see that having 4 ITRAs on the map or having 4 OSAs on the map is not entertaining for them to play, and it's also not entertaining for the fans to watch. So they do make these gentlemen's agreements on behalf of the community as well as themselves, even though some people may not just see it that way. And obviously there's, you know, certain members of the community that do just think of their own personal situation, which makes a lot of sense. But on the whole, if the consensus is to get rid of something, it makes sense to do it. And hopefully the developers will be more receptive to getting rid of things in a quicker time frame than we have seen in the past. Because a couple months down the line, a couple events down the line, just isn't going to cut it if the M1 Grand is going to get pulled out by amateur teams anyway. That is definitely an interesting paradigm we have. So I wanted to go into this comment we had yesterday, from some burner account, GA in COD. So I want to just read you through this because it covers some of the civil litigation, they say, regarding potential collusion and cheating. So supposedly this is in the rule set, but we'll go through this first. A group is considering civil litigation regarding collusion at CWL hosted COD events. This has nothing to do with the recent GA drama among pro teams. However, I'm capitalizing on the renewed interest of GAs among the community heading into the 2018-2019 CWL season. Over the summer, a few members formed the initial group after being dissatisfied with the code of conduct of CWL organizations and players. This group has been expanding slowly due to fears of retaliation if members become public and acquire trust of anyone they approach. This is their story. So a growing number of the community members apparently, take this all with a grain of salt, do not want to play under a rule set decided by a small group of players from pro and amateur teams. It is clear, even among players on pro teams, that GAs are used to create advantages for them under the guise of competitive play. So this is kind of what I'm saying, that teams want certain things banned. There's definitely an incentive for teams to want certain things banned that help their particular team. That's why I think a consensus among pro teams is so important on this issue. Everyone not influenced by personal gain or fantasism understands this as a conflict of interest. Most of these players are representatives of organizations. They use the threat of scrim blacklisting, fan influence, and organizational blacklisting to force teams to compete under a rule set of their choosing. All of this is called collusion and is explicitly against the CWL rules. So an interesting end to this sentence here. The fact that these teams are colluding, maybe there is a case of that, but if it's every single team, and I'm definitely against this blacklisting situation, but I don't want to comment too much on this post. I'd be more interested in what your thoughts are on it in the comments below. So 6.1 cheating. I'm guessing this is an extract from the official rule set or something like that. Players must compete to the best of their ability at all times. Any form of cheating by any participant may not be tolerated. So go down a little bit further. Collusion is an example of cheating. We also have this point, agreeing to a rule set outside the rules. So supposedly this is actually in the CWL rule set. Agreeing to a rule set outside the rules is considered cheating. So they go on to say, everyone in the CWL understands GAs are actively ongoing and nothing is being done about it. The CWL knows this is wrong and the broadcast team was even instructed to never mention gentlemen's agreements. Don't know if you guys remember this, but Clayster pulled out the M1 Grand against, was it Ghost Gaming or something like that? And or some team of that kind of caliber. And the CWL didn't mention it for understandable reasons. So they effectively go on to say that this group has been advised that this may also constitute a legitimate criminal conspiracy in some jurisdictions. Very interesting indeed. I'll link this comment down below if you want to read the entire thing and mull over it yourself. So this group isn't interested in any type of litigation. They want to remain anonymous, have GAs become a thing of the past and move on with their careers to focus on solely competing under the CWL rule set. They appreciate the foundation of COD esports. I do not like the hyphen there. And all the parties involved have contributed, but this needs to be fixed. A player was chosen by the group to anonymously contact League Ops in October regarding GAs. They received no response, including no request for more information, supposedly. CWL Vegas is fast approaching and they're hoping it is made very clear to all players and organizations that these rules will now be severely and strictly enforced. Elimination of GAs is the only goal of this group, they say here. So if you want to read the rest of the comment, I'll link it down below. Ant-Man, a mod of the subreddit, one of the best. He replies saying, are players being stopped from winning or earning money as a result of certain players agreeing to not use certain weapons when playing each other? Is a competitive advantage being gained by the players only using certain weapons? Because it seems the opposite may be true. A non-participating member would have the advantage over teams who actually are participating, similar to how amateur teams can pull out the M1 Grand whenever they choose, whereas the pro teams have a gentleman's agreement not to do so, for example. And, you know, he's not seeing evidence of a criminal conspiracy, and the individual in question kind of gives a pretty pretentious response here to Ant-Man. So, anyway, make of this what you will. The overall gentleman's agreement situation is a very interesting one right now. My overall stance is the grapple hook should not be gentleman's agreemented, but I do think the developers need to step in and make changes that the professionals on the whole want to see to the competitive scene. I think banning the grapple hook is not the way to go, but what choice really do the pros have when they think it's something ridiculously strong? Maybe not the example of the grapple hook, but something like the Osa or something like the Itcha that we mentioned earlier. If it's not going to be nerfed for competitive play and the developers aren't eager to do that, and it makes competitive play very ridiculous or very anti-competitive or very random or very not entertaining for the fans, for example, then what choice do the pros really have other than to decide to gentleman's agreement that weapon or equipment out of competitive? I don't think that's the case with the grapple hook, but I do think that if the developers are a little bit keener, a little bit more on the ball about making changes specific for competitive play, then we might have a better situation where GAs are no longer required. And what do you think about this last comment about it potentially being illegal or a criminal conspiracy or supposedly against CWL rules and they're not doing much about it? Because maybe the CWL realised that, well, it kind of makes sense, and the devs are the ones at the forefront of actually trying to fix these issues. Of course, I'm not saying the pros don't take it too far. The long barrel bar in World War II for sure was taking Gentleman's Agreement to the next level, I believe. Maybe it was somewhat viable, but there are definitely some things where the pros take it a bit too far on the Gentleman's Agreement. And as I say, unless the consensus is there, I feel like it shouldn't be the case. So like if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, and I'd really be interested to hear your thoughts on this in the comments below. Definitely some varying views on this, I'm sure. Try and keep it civil down in the comments. If you go into a conversation thinking that your opponent, you could say, knows something that you don't, then maybe you'll have a better time of things in the comments below. So thank you guys so much for watching as always, and I'll see you next time.